So we're going to get started today. Last week we talked about managing your bees through that late winter, early spring, where we go in, we check them every few weeks, lift the lid, see where if they're alive, if they have enough feed, if they need feed, or if they've died, and keeping meticulous notes, noting the strength, putting our queen orders in for our splits. And I had a few questions last week on that afterward. One of them was, why am I buying queens? Well, what do we need when we raise a queen? If we are going to raise one ourselves or let the bees raise one, we need, number one, we need a pollen flow. We need a nectar flow, both of those for sure. We also need good weather, flying weather for those queens. But one of the most important things we need are drones. The bees don't start raising the drones until we're kind of into spring, when spring is really starting to come along. That's when they start raising their drones. And I always like to talk a little bit about biology, just a little bit when we talk about these things. If we think about a drone, how long does it take to raise a drone from egg to emergence? 24 days. So that queen lays an unfertilized egg, which is going to become a drone. It's going to be 24 days before that drone emerges. Secondly, when that drone does emerge, it is not yet sexually mature. It's going to take another 5 days or so for that drone to be sexually mature. So if you think 24 days, let's say another 5 days, we're at 29, almost 1 month. So if we start letting the bees try to raise their own queen in, say, early April, that drone may be available in early May, but early May, we know we have a lot of rain. So when that queen emerges, maybe we'll have drones, but she can't fly. Or maybe there's really not a great pollen flow at that time, and maybe they haven't started raising drones yet when you make that split. So for me, I always go into spring buying queens because I know I can't make a good queen that early in the spring, and neither can the bees for the reasons I just listed. A month afterward, once I get into May, it's a whole different story. So what we're going to start out talking about are queens themselves. When I say, what kind of queens are there as far as us in our beekeeping? I say there's three kinds. The kinds we buy, the kinds we make, and the kinds the bees make. So I've talked about the kinds we buy. Why do I buy queens? I just listed why. I can't make a queen that early in the season. But there's other reasons to do it as well. I've got my apiary set up, right? And I've got my colonies in there. If I just keep grafting or letting the bees raise queens, I don't bring in any new genetic diversity. So I'm using that springtime when I'm buying my queens for those early spring splits. I'm using those to bring genetic diversity into my apiaries. Those queens, if I want to bring in a Carnolian, or I want to bring in Italians or Saskatraz or whatever it may be, I'm going to make a split, use that queen, and so I've got new genetic diversity into my apiary. Okay? So that's with buying queens. Now that, for me, and again, it comes down to what you want to do, what you're able to do. If you can graft queens, or you know how to let the bees make their own queens, that's fine. You don't have to buy any if you don't want to. But if you can do neither of those, it's fine to buy queens. It's just an added expense. See, we always want to keep our expensive beekeeping down. It's an expensive hobby anyway. So always, think about what your goals are with queens. So in the springtime, I buy my queens. I use those to make my splits. Now, once we get into that period of the year, when we do have drones, when the weather's more consistent to, warmer, sunny days, not so much rain, we know our queen's going to fly, we know there's a good drone population, then we can let the bees make their own queens. How do we do that? Well, if I'm going to do a split on a hive, I'm going to go into this colony. It's very strong. I know I can take resources away from here, and I'm going to put them into this nuke box and let these bees make a queen. A couple of things I want to make sure. I want to make sure I've got a lot of pollen coming in. I want to make sure there's a nectar flow on, and I want to build a very strong population of nurse bees in this nuke. So if I were going to build this and let the bees raise their own queens, the first thing I would do is I would go into what I call the mother colony, and I'd pull frames till I found the queen. I would take the frame with my current queen and I would set her aside just so I don't accidentally shake her into here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start pulling frames out of here, starting at the center and working to the outsides. And I'm going to look for eggs. Hopefully, if you can see eggs, that's great. If you can't, you've got to look for the tiniest larva you can. When I say the tiniest larva, you should not be able to see it very easily with the naked eye. What you're more apt to see is that pool of royal jelly in the bottom, and you pretty much can't see that tiny larva. It's going to be in there about shaped like this. If you can see that C shape, that larva is too old. Ideally, the best queens come from 1, maybe 2-day-old larva. I prefer 1-day-old larva. So you're going to look for those frames. Now, it's almost a guarantee that you will have larvae like that if you can see eggs on the frame. Because as we know, the queen starts in the center of that frame, and as she lays, she goes outward like this. So when we pull that frame, most likely if there's cap brood in the center, the further we go out to the edges, we're going to eventually see eggs. Somewhere between that cap brood and those eggs are going to be some 1-day-old larvae. So I like to make sure I've got either eggs or 1-day-old larvae. I'm going to pull a couple of frames of those and put them into this box, this nuke box. 2 frames with brood, some cap brood on it as well. I'm going to put those in there. Then I'm going to take frames, a lot of bees, and I'm going to shake bees into here, nurse bees. Now, the one thing that you need to keep in mind is we can stock this nuke box with nurse bees from multiple colonies. They won't fight. We don't have to worry about it. If this is, we don't want to pull them all from this colony if this colony is not super strong. We can shake a lot of bees from here, just keep shaking a lot of bees. We want to shake the equivalent of about a package worth of bees, which is 3 pounds or about 10,000 bees. I like to put a lot in here. So I may shake some frames from here. Okay, that's all I want to take from this side. I'm going to put it back, put the queen frame back in here, close this one back up. I'll go to another colony over here and do the exact same thing. Find my queen, put her aside, shake more bees in here. Because the bees I shook in here, this colony, this was not their original colony. Some came from here, some came from there. They're suddenly in this new colony. They're not going to fight with each other. So we shake them in there. The last thing we want to do is, number one, we want to certainly make sure that we've got pollen coming in. So we want to do this when there's ample amounts of pollen coming in. We can put a pollen patty in here as well, just for insurance. And we want to put a feeder on top of here or inside here, either a frame feeder or a top feeder. When I start raising nukes like this, I like to take my lid and drill a hole in this migratory cover. I'll drill a hole in here, and then I'll take some sort of a jar feeder and I'll put it over top. Because if I have a lot of these nuke boxes going, I want to be able to look down through my apiary and I can see if this is running low, I'm going to switch it out because I always want them to have nectar. We're going to talk about the importance of nectar and pollen when we talk about nutrition, how things work, but maybe we could touch on it right now. People always, they're always willing to feed sugar syrup to their bees, but they don't feed pollen all the time when they need to. And I always say that you need to understand how bees are raised. Every egg that's laid, when that egg hatches, for the first 3 days, those bees are fed royal jelly. What is royal jelly? Royal jelly comes from the hypopharyngeal gland in the nurse bee's head. So for that nurse bee to make royal jelly, it has to consume bee bread. What is bee bread? Bee bread is a mixture of pollen and nectar. The bees mix a little bit together and it goes through enzymatic changes and becomes bee bread. Bees really cannot digest pollen as it comes into the hive. They have to turn it into bee bread. So bee bread comes from nectar and pollen. Bee bread consumed by the nurse bees becomes royal jelly. So if you take away either pollen or nectar, you have no bee bread, you have no royal jelly. What that means is they cannot raise brood. So when we're making this split and we want them to raise that queen, they need a lot of pollen, they need a lot of nectar, because those queens need a lot of royal jelly. So that's if we are going to let the bees raise a queen. Now the other thing I do with my queens, and this is going to come into play when I talk a little bit later on making later season nukes and splits. I graft a lot of bees, a lot of queen bees. For people who have never done it, it seems very intimidating. People who have done it will tell you it's easy, it's very easy. And it's very cheap as well. For me to graft queens. I don't know what I've got on here, about, I don't know, 15 cell cups. I have a grafting bar, 15 cell cups, a frame that this will go in, which unfortunately I don't have today, a grafting pen, and a frame with those one-day-old larvae. So when I'm going to graft, I can go into my colony, find that frame that's got that very young one-day-old larva in it, and I'm just going to pick those larvae out, place them in these cell cups, and then I'm going to put them into a hive. And there are some special considerations we have to do in the hive that's going to raise these queens, but it's very, very easy. The frames that these go in can hold 3 of these cell bars. So if I've done it right, I can raise 45 queens for under 50 bucks. 45 queens. That's a lot of queens. I always believe people should have spare queens on hand. I graft a lot of queens. I have them in nuke boxes. I have in mini mating nukes. I keep a lot of them on hand, so when I lose a queen or need to requeen a colony, I've got the queen right there. To learn how to graft, I tell people there's a lot of videos out there that show how to do it. Very, very easy. One of the things that taught me a lot about grafting was this book, Larry Connor's Queen Rearing Essentials. It breaks it down very simple, explains everything, and it tells you exactly what you need to do to raise queens. So we're going to come back to this queen rearing thing in a little bit, because I'm going to talk now more about nukes and splits. I talked about the spring splits. When our hives come into spring, they're very strong. We know as the nectar flow gets really going, they're going to start swarm preparation. I'm going to lose a lot of my bees. So we've weakened these bees in springtime so they don't swarm. We may have created a nuke, or we may have created another full colony by taking bees from multiple colonies and putting them in here with a new queen. Now there's another time of year. Now again, when I talk to you, I talk about what I do here in northeastern Pennsylvania. You have to take this and adapt it to your area where you keep bees. Everybody's a little bit different. My nectar flow goes from about the time the dandelions bloom till about the 4th of July. Then I have another nectar flow that starts about the 20th of August. It goes till the end of September. So I've got a break in there of about 50 days of my nectar flow. If you've ever looked at your colony, and measured through the season, when is your colony at its strongest, most populous time? It's always at the end of the nectar flow. I come into the beginning of July, my colonies are boiling over with bees, and there's no nectar, none. So again, we're going to go back to the biology. Just remember my nectar flow is over July 4th. We're going to call it July 4th. June 1st, the queen lays an egg. How long is it before that egg, it's a worker bee, how long before that egg hatches, pupate, goes through its larval stage, pupates, and emerges? 21 days. So now if it's June 1st, I'm at June 21st, right? Now, how many days does it take for that bee that just emerged to go through all of its duties in the hive before it becomes a forager? That's approximately another 21 days, another 3 weeks. So we're talking the time that egg is laid till the time that bee becomes a forager is 6 weeks. That puts me from June 1st, that puts me at about July 15th. My nectar flow's been over for 2 weeks. So to me, that bee is a wasted resource. Why would I let that bee stay in that colony? So I go into my colonies. I usually start about the 14th or so of June is when I usually do mine. And what I do is I go in and I pull a lot of those resources, all of that brood that is never going to be a forager. I pull a lot of that out and I put it into a nuke box. So I'll take it out of this colony. I'll rob a lot of brood out of here and put it into a nuke box and shake some nurse bees in with it. And I'm gonna queen that hive, and I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. So what have I done? The mother colony here had a lot of brood they were feeding. We're right in the middle of the nectar flow. It's anywhere from June 1st to June 14th, right in that period. The nectar flow is still on. We're still getting a lot of pollen, but they're raising a lot of brood, and that young brood that's in here today will never be a forager during my nectar flow. So to me, it's a wasted resource. So I'm going to take all of that brood out, a lot of it, and put it into this nuke box. I'm going to shake some bees in there. So what have I done to this mother colony? There's less brood for them to feed. All the foragers are still here because they all come back to this colony. I've still got my original queen in here. She's going to continue to lay. And I've got a few more weeks of the nectar flow. So rather than a lot of that nectar going to feed all this young larva, it's being stored as honey up in the supers. And this hive will do fine. It's in great shape, no issues. They're still raising brood. I haven't weakened it that much. But what I've done is taken all of that brood and put it in here, and I put some nurse bees in here. Now, this is where I always say, plan out your year, use the calendar, do all of that stuff. I didn't say anything about a queen yet here. So I've got all these bees, I've got all this brood, but what about a queen? Okay, I used my calendar. If I'm going to do what I just talked about on June 14th, June 1st, I've gone into one or more of my colonies, pulled frames, and I've grafted queens. Why? Because a queen takes how many days? 16 days. So if I graft that 1-day-old larva on, say, June 4th, June 4th, I have grafted that 1-day-old larva. 16 days, it's going to emerge. So day 14 would be June 10th, right? Is that right? No, sorry, got it wrong. June 14th will be 10 days later. It'll be 2 days before that queen emerges, if I did my math right. I'm going to come in here, graft these so that these queen cells are 14 days old when I do this split. I'm going to come in, take all these ripe queens. They're going to be long queen cells, nice queen cells. And I'm going to take these and I'm going to go down through my hives. And I'm going to take one queen cell off of each one. If I can get it out. I'm going to take that queen out and I'm going to put her down in between the frames at the top. I'm just going to, you probably can't see this, but I'm just going to stick her right in top here. So she's hanging down there, down inside the colony, and she'll emerge a couple of days later. Now these bees are queenless. I've left them queenless maybe half a day before I put these queen cells in there. So they know they're queenless. So they're not going to tear down that queen cell. They're going to let it there. Sometimes I'll put a queen cell protector around it, which you can look those up and see what they are. But I'll make all these nuke boxes with all these queens. So what have I done? I've used my own bees to populate this. I've used my own grafted queens to put queens in here. So this new hive basically cost me nothing other than the equipment itself. So I do this for overwintering. Now, because I'm doing it in June up in my area, I can't raise good queens after the beginning of July. The nectar flow is over. She's not going to lay a lot of brood. It's not going to grow. So I'm going to start this in June. So she emerges, she goes out some mates, and she starts laying a lot of brood before the nectar flow is over. And I get these nukes going. Now, this is how I expand my apiary or recover from a lot of winter losses. The nuke I'm making right now in June is going to be an overwintered nuke. And when I overwinter a nuke, this will not have time to grow into a full colony by winter. It's not going to be 10 deep with another 10 on top. It just doesn't have the time. We're on the clock, right? We've got that dearth for 50 days. Then I've got a fall flow. Now I'm going to feed this through my dearth. I'm going to give it both pollen substitute and I'm going to give it nectar. And at some point, all 5 frames in here are going to be drawn out and they're going to be filled, and I'm going to add a second box. So when I get closer to my fall flow, by then this bottom box is filled. I'm going to add my second box with frames. It can be drawn or undrawn. Now, if you don't have a fall nectar flow, you probably want to consider putting drawn comb in this box. If you have a good fall nectar flow, you don't have to. You can put foundation in here. Maybe switch one frame in the bottom up to the top so you have a drawn filled frame up here to encourage the bees up. But what this is going to do is by fall, by first frost, both of these boxes are going to be filled with, this one hopefully is filled with capped honey, and this one's got capped honey plus the brood and all the bees in it. This can easily go through winter. It's not a problem. Most people think they can't take a nuke like this through winter. You can, and this is how you overwinter nukes. So what I've done, I've made all of this with my own resources, my own bees, queens I grafted, and drawn comb where I needed it. The only thing I had to buy maybe were the nuke boxes. This is how you build more sustainability or stability into your apiary. Most of our losses occur in the wintertime. And I have a lot of people that tell me, well, I only want 4 colonies. I only ever want 4 colonies. Well, that's great if you can keep those 4 colonies alive year after year after year. But it doesn't happen that way, right? You go into winter with 4, a lot of times you come out with 1 or 2, sometimes none. Why not do this? Take your resources from that strong colony. Make nukes to overwinter. And when you go through winter, we go through winter with our, if you only want 4 colonies, you've got your 4 colonies, your 4 overwintered nukes. You come into spring and you've lost half of your hives. Guess what? You've still got 4 hives. Maybe 2 of your real hives made it and 2 of your nukes made it. You're back to 4 hives. And these overwintered nukes, number one, they're very young, so they're not apt to swarm the next spring. And number 2, they'll be your best honey producers. So that's a way to build in stability in your beekeeping. Don't think along the lines of, I only want 4 colonies, so that's all I'm ever going to have. No, you should think along the lines of, I only want 4 colonies, so I'm going to go into winter with 8. That's the way to think about it. Now, one thing I did not touch on was I didn't touch on swarms the other week. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. You know, as good as we try to be with our bees, there are times we just don't have time to get to them, or they, you know, we didn't see them building up a swarm cells, and it's too late, they've swarmed on us. Or somebody else's, better yet, the neighbor's apiary swarms. That's an opportunity to get freebies as well. A lot of people talk about swarm traps and all kinds of things. All I do in swarm season, I take a box like this, a nuke box. I put it usually, a few hundred yards from any apiaries I know. I face this box toward the south, usually in an open area. I don't want it in the woods, maybe on the edge of the woods, but facing the opening. I hang this box 8 feet off the ground on maybe a side of a tree or something, 8 to 10 feet. And the one thing I use is I do use a swarm lure. Now, I take a box, I put brand new comb in here. Brand new, because swarms are the best foundation builders we have. Before they swarm, before they left the colony, they filled up with nectar because they know wherever they go, they immediately have to draw comb in a new home. So I put in all brand new frames, except for one. I put one old stinky brood frame in here because that smell attracts those swarms. I put those out somewhere. I put a little drop of a swarm lure of some kind. There's a lot of different ones on the market. I prefer this one. I think it works fantastic. And I use that and I put these out. So swarm season is in my area, swarm season is usually anywhere from the end of April through about the end of May is the biggest swarm season. I put these out, a lot of these boxes out in that time frame. Maybe I'll catch a swarm. Great, I got free bees. If this does nothing for me by the end of May or early June, I take it down because this is what I'm going to make that overwintered nuke in. Nuke boxes are one of your most valuable pieces of equipment because they're so versatile for a lot of things. So, just to recap a little bit about what we talked about, managing our bees according to their biology and the environment around us is what helps us be stable in our beekeeping. Know when your nectar flow is. Know that biology of, hey, my nectar flow ends on this day, so almost 30 days before that, any egg that's laid is never going to forage for me. Why do I keep that? Why keep it in this mother colony? Why not use that resource to expand my apiary? So that's kind of all I wanted to cover today on beekeeping and sustainability and stability, is utilizing our own resources. Again, queens, we can let the bees build a queen as long as there's drones, as long as there's pollen and nectar out there, and as long as there's temperature, good temperatures so that queen can fly out her daily mating flights. Remember, she's only got about 5 days she can mate. After she emerges, she hangs around a bit. When she goes on her first flight, from that time on, she's only got, I think it's 4 or 5 days that she can mate. After that, she can't mate. So there are times early in the year when it's very rainy. If it rains 5 days in a row, she can't fly. She's done. She'll never mate. So those are the kind of things to remember early in the season. Later in the season, it's not quite as important. But I've showed you how to do all this. Any one of these things will work, or all three are even better. It'll help you build your apiary. And if you get too many bees, you say, I don't want 8 colonies. Well, if you were good enough to do 4 overwintered nukes and your 4 original colonies going into winter, and you come out with now 8 colonies, I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding somebody to buy those 4 nukes from you. And the money you get from those will help you in your beekeeping, because you always need more equipment. Now, one thing I will add about nukes, when I make these nukes in the summertime to overwinter, you got to remember that when a queen goes out to mate, if I did 100 nukes, I could only count on about 75 of them being successful, because a lot of those queens, when they fly out to mate, they may get picked off by a bird, whatever, they don't make it back, or they come back and they go to the wrong colony. They go to the wrong colony, they're going to immediately be killed by those bees. So always plan on having a success rate of about 75% when you make these nukes to overwinter. So we do 100, 75 come back. We have 75 new nukes that are, doing well. We take them into winter. We come out into winter, maybe we had a bad winter, and we come out with 40 of those nukes. Well, that's still 40 free hives of bees that we got for basically nothing. For the price of a book, a couple of grafting tools, things like that, and some nuke boxes. So I use the example 100 because I make a lot of nukes to keep, my apiaries going. You may only have 2 colonies. It doesn't matter. Do it on your scale. I've gotten to the point now where, because I can do all this with my bees and I can make more bees out of my existing resources, that I have 140 colonies. I would say I have about 140. There's times when I have 160. There's times when I have 90, or less. I could come out of this winter, I haven't checked all my colonies yet, I could come out with a 50% loss. So if I went in with 140, I could come out with 70. I know by June 15th or so, June 30th, I'll be back at my 140, because I've done all this to get back to where I was without having to do anything that maybe buy some queens early in the spring. Everything else I did on my own. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. Hopefully you learned something from this. Like I said, don't be afraid to graft. Grafting is very, very easy. Like a lot of things in beekeeping, people are very, they think it's a very complex thing. It isn't. Basically taking a larva, putting it in a cell cup, and putting it in a hive that thinks it's queenless, and they make a queen out of it for you. Really easy. I was intimidated by it my first time. Actually, not my first time. The first time I did it, I grafted probably 45 queens on bars, and I think out of my only lost about 5. And I thought I was a genius. They almost all took, I had all these queens for free. So the second time I was a little cockier. I did it again, and I came out with 0. So don't be discouraged if you do it the first time and you get no queens. Just keep doing it. It's not hard. Look at some videos, read that book on queen rearing essentials. It'll break it all down to you. And if you do it right, you'll have all the queens you ever need. I actually go into fall a lot of times with spare queens, just in very, very weak nuke boxes that I know aren't going to make it through the winter. But those queens are there in case any of my other big colonies has a queen issue. I can take the queen out of there, replace any of the queens in my existing colonies with her. And if I end up not using her, well, kind of get rid of her in the fall. But at least I have her. I'm not scrambling. How many people out there have found themselves in a situation where they've gone into a colony, they found out they had an issue with their queen. Either she was gone, they were queenless, or they injured her by accident, something, or she was laying drones now, she was no longer laying worker brood, and you're in a panic trying to find a queen. Well, it's nice when you have the queen right next to that colony. You go, no problem, I've got a queen right here, and you do it yourself. And that's where everybody should be, because it's, like I said, none of this is difficult to do. None of it. I didn't know any of it when I started, and I picked it up little by little. And everything that I thought was intimidating when I first started looking at it, I realized it was very, very simple. All of this can be done by any beekeeper that's got a year or 2 under their belt. And at some point, I may do a grafting class. I don't know how well to come out doing it, trying to do it on Facebook or something like that. But if we get back to real classes, we'll do them here in our Wilkes-Barre facility. But maybe we'll try to get one on video and show you how to do it, because it isn't hard. And it will turn your beekeeping around. You'll be able to make those hives whenever you want. You'll be able to replace queens whenever you want. So hopefully you got something out of why we make our early spring splits when the dandelions bloom or whenever your sign of your nectar flow start is, why we do them in June. There are two different types of nukes. That spring nuke will become a full colony by fall, where that summer nuke, late spring, early summer nuke will never become a full colony that fall. You're going to overwinter it in a 5/5 nuke, and that'll be a full colony next spring. And the queens we talked about. Let the bees make their own queens, us grafting queens, or buying queens, and why we would do each, which we would do in whatever situations. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully you pick something up today. If you have questions, put them out there. We'll get them answered. I don't know if there are any out there yet that we could answer for you, but I'd to answer anything you've got. We want you to all be able to do this, and hopefully some of you will email me after the season this year and tell me, hey, I tried grafting, or I did what you said about nukes, and I did this, and I'd like to hear about your successes because it's a lot of fun when you do it. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you this time next week.